the rock bottom moment. When you hit that moment of rock bottom, it's kind of like, oh my God, what's the point of this? I've spoken to musicians, actors, coaches, influencers. There's always a very similar trend in the conversation. It's that there's a rock bottom type moment. And then in that moment, it's like, I need to be doing something else here. There's like a want for change. And then that sparks something. And some of the artists who I've spoken to, their rock bottom was like living in poor conditions. For other people, it's like struggles with mental health. It was almost like a catalyst moment. Hello and welcome to episode 276 of In the Moment with me, Alex Manzi. I'm a coach. This podcast is all about self-development and helping you to live a happier, more fulfilling life. And each week on this podcast, we hear some of the stories of some of the most inspirational people in the world to help inspire you to make a positive change in your life. And on this week's episode, we're doing things a little bit differently because this is a recording of a podcast that I did for someone else, which unfortunately didn't go out, but I still had all of the footage and the audio that I recorded on my side of things. And I thought it was a shame to waste it because there were so many great things that I was sharing in the episode, even if I say so myself. And I wanted to make sure that I shared it with you guys because to me, like, there's some of my biggest learnings since I've been on my self-development journey over the last 9-10 years. And some of the biggest learnings that I've made since starting this podcast in 2017 and interviewing over 200 people. So this episode is a little bit different to normal, but in it, I share some of my biggest learnings from going from depressed to happy, my story from working social media in the BBC to being a life coach. And I also talk about some of the impactful learnings that I've made in recent times, especially how we're ultimately connected to nature, the power and the implications of understanding the 0+ principle and understanding that you guys will hear me talking about, and much, much more. So if you like this episode and you're digging what you're hearing, be sure to like and subscribe it, and be sure to share it with a friend because I started this episode to inspire a positive change, and you can be a part of that by sharing this episode with someone you know today. But right now, let's jump straight in and hear the episode. So I've worked out to be about 9 years ago, pretty much coming up to September, October time, 9 years ago. I was 25 and I had this moment where I was with my ex-girlfriend. Well, she was my girlfriend at the time. She's now an ex-girlfriend. And I had what I would call a breakdown in front of her. And I kind of realized in that moment, all in like this epiphany moment of like, wow, I've spent the last X many years, and it's really hard to put a number on it because I don't know how long I was living as I was living because it just seemed normal. But I figured it must have been between like 17, 18 up until that moment at 25. And I'd been living miserable, like very unhappy. You know, I'm sure if someone had an opportunity to diagnose me, they would diagnose me depressed, or I was having lots of thoughts about not wanting to live anymore and stuff like that. And sorry to take it a bit morbid early, but it was the reality at the time. And this breakdown that I had in front of my girlfriend was like, it was the first time that I'd really acknowledged to someone, but also for myself out loud, that I just wasn't happy with my life, and I just didn't feel in a great place. You know, I couldn't even get my words out at the time. Like the way it came about is we were having this back and forth, you know, like a lover's tiff, should we call it? And my girlfriend at the time, she was saying something to me, and we were going back and forth. And then she just turned around at one point and she went, "Why aren't you saying anything?" And I was sort of like stumped. I was sitting there thinking, we've just been having this back and forth for like 5-10 minutes. And she was like, "Why aren't you saying anything? Why aren't you saying anything?" And that was the moment where it's like my reality fractured, because it was like I realized that I'd been answering her, but only in my head. But I thought I was saying it out loud. And I realized there was so much of my life that I'd lived in my own head like that and hadn't been maybe vocalizing or whatever. And I just bawled into tears for like flat out on the bed. And her energy went to like, "Oh, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's going on?" And at the time, the only words that I could get out was, "I just don't feel like me. I just don't feel like me." That was the only, between all of the it was I just don't feel like me. And that was it. I couldn't explain it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know whatever. And then once I'd kind of settled down, her mum was actually a therapist. So we went downstairs and spoke to her mum, and she tried to help me make sense of what was going on. And still, it felt really weird. It felt very uncomfortable. But then over time, slowly over the next like week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, it just started to feel like a massive relief. It was like I'd finally admitted this I don't know, falsity that I was living in my head, and I could be more expressive. And it just kind of went from there. You know, it was like getting out of the mind conversations and just expressing it was like a real moment of relief. And that's kind of how it felt initially. And then it went to confusion, because it was like, oh, now what do I do? Like, oh, like the mind kicking back in, like, okay, what do we do now? How do we fix it? How do we solve it? And it was like confusion for like a year and a half. But it was during that year and a half where I started to make those changes that I mentioned earlier. And I started to see that something was changing. I didn't know what it was, couldn't explain it, but I noticed it was happening. So it was a mixture of like relief and then confusion for like a grey zone, like no man's land for like quite a long time. And it was strange because you'd look at it on paper and you think, well, at the time you had a good girlfriend, you had a great job in advertising, you know, you had your own car, you were on your way to buying your own place. There was like a bunch of stuff that on paper looked like, well, you should be quite happy with how your life's going. You're earning good money and stuff like that, going on nice holidays with my family and friends, but I wasn't. And that moment was like a real awakening for me of like, well, what does happiness actually mean then? If this stuff isn't making me happy, what does? And it set me on this path. And I went to a few therapy sessions with this lady that I was recommended, and the work didn't really resonate with me at the time for whatever reason. I'm not judging therapy, I think it's great, but it just didn't resonate with me. And I felt like I wanted to look more like forward, like what do I want from life? What do I want to create? How do I want to live, kind of stuff. And I didn't know of coaching back then. So I kind of looked into self-help books, personal development books, things like the Chimp Paradox and the Power of Now, and some spiritual books and stuff like that. And after about a year and a half, I started to notice that my life was changing. My perspective was a lot more positive. I felt a bit more excited about the possibility of the future, whereas before it seemed really like doom and gloom and all of this. And that kind of led me onto this idea of like, wow, like what's been going on in my life? What have I been doing? Because I made some changes, which was like reading the books, listening to inspirational podcasts, exercising regularly, meditating daily, changing up my diet to make it more healthy, and just generally living better, shall we say. And it looked like that was the stuff that helped me. So after, I'm going down the clock a little bit, but after a couple more years or another year and a half or so, I decided I wanted to start my podcast, because I was starting to see the change in my life. And it was like, wow, if I can change my life around, surely other people can as well if I share my story. And I was working in music at the time at the BBC for one of the radio stations, Radio 1 Extra. And I was very connected in the music world at the time. So I started to reach out to people, photographers, DJs, videographers, managers, people who owned labels, and started to interview them about their journey into what they did. What was the thing that got you to where you are? Because you look very happy in what you do. And the podcast started to build up a bit of a head of steam, shall we say, a bit of attention. And that was the moment where the more I shared that online and my journey online, that people started to then come to me and ask for advice. They were like, you seem to have figured out whatever you figured out, like help me, kind of thing. And I still didn't know what coaching was then. And that was kind of like my first taste of coaching, I would say. And then I remembered, actually I started to hear about coaching in some of the podcasts I was listening to and like the books I was reading. And to me, coaching was like football coaching, tennis coaching, fitness coaching, etc., etc., etc. I didn't have an idea what this life coaching thing was. And I remembered that many, many years before, in 2011, I think it was, I worked with this guy called John Dashfield on a project for the marketing company I worked for at the time, which was building a well-being app, I guess. And he was a life coach, and he was the only person in the whole world that I knew that actually was this thing called a life coach. So I reached out to him on LinkedIn. Hey, John, how you doing? Told him what I was up to. I was interested to hear what he did. And we went for lunch, and he just said to me, right, this is what I do, explained a bit about coaching, how he works with people. It didn't make any sense to me at the time. I still didn't get what he did. And he said to me, look, if you're into coaching, like, go and check out this stuff over here by Steve Chandler, like, in his work for the business side of coaching and the approach that's been helpful for me. And then for the more life, perspective, psychological stuff, go check out this guy called Sydney Banks. I hadn't heard of any of these two guys. I was like, all right, cool. I'll go check out this, see what it's all about. And that was it. Fast forward nearly 5 years. Yeah, coming up to 5 years, I suppose. Here we are. The rock bottom moment. When you hit that moment of rock bottom, it's kind of like, oh my God, what's the point of this life? Like, why am I here? Like, what's the point of it all? It's like a real like, ugh. But then on the flip side, when you get to a position where you start to see life from the reality and the truth of how we actually experience life, it's like a different kind of like, oh, what's the point? Nothing matters. It's like the same kind of question as at both ends of the spectrum, and it's a really funny way like to experience the same thing, but in two entirely different ways. One's through despair and like fear and worry, and the other one's through like the complete opposite, like freedom and expression, and just like, nothing matters, it doesn't matter, it's fine, like, why are we here? I don't know. I've spoken to musicians, actors, coaches, influencers, and there's always a very similar trend in the conversation. Is that there's a rock bottom type moment. It's not the same for everyone, but it's a rock bottom type moment. And then in that moment, it's like, I need to be doing something else here. And there's like a want for change. And then that sparks something. And it looks very different. Some of the artists who I've spoken to, their rock bottom was like living in poor conditions and wanting to make more out of their life than what they grew up with. For other people, it's like struggles with mental health. For other people, it's like losing, everything that they thought they had. And it's very different for everyone, but there's like, it was almost like a catalyst moment, especially when I find when it comes to people who are coaches or people who talk about, share their own experience. It's normally come from a place of desperation within themselves first, to then, go on their own journey and then want to bring people along on that journey in their own way. It looks very different for everyone, but that's the kind of general arc that that you tend to see. It's like the movie arc. It's like everything starts off okay, then it all goes to crap, and then it's like, okay, we need to build it back up again. It's a very similar thing. What does it mean to be happy? Because I felt like I was so unhappy for such a long time. It was like, what makes me happy? Well, I guess was the question that I had at the time. And that I was just following that narrative, and it was leading me to different things. It might have been meditation or regular exercise or cutting out sugar and junk food from my diet. Then it was, then turning vegetarian, and then like exercising more, and then, a bunch of stuff. Even through the books that if I, it's actually quite funny now that I think about it. If I lined up the books, right, that are in chronological order as I read them, if I could remember, like you'd almost see the trail of breadcrumbs. You'd see like it started off here and now it's like way over here somewhere, and it's like the consciousness rise is like the type of stuff that I was reading and consuming as well was also taking form as an evolution of me. And I've said the same thing throughout my life, well, especially the last 4.5 years I've had the podcast. Like, the podcast has always been an extension of me. It started out like, okay, let's hear about your career, let's hear about your journey, tell me like what motivates you, what makes you tick. And now it's like, hey, yeah, let's talk about consciousness, and like let's talk about how the brain really works, and let's talk like, unconditional love and stuff like that. And it's an extension of my journey. And the more that I kind of lean into that, it's like I'm very happy where I am in my life. I couldn't be happier. Like, I know it doesn't get any better than this, but I also know that it will continue to evolve just by looking at the past trajectory without even trying, and that's exciting. The thing that I struggled with for so long was like the balance, being open to what unfolds and open to the possibilities and open to the trajectory of life without having anything to do, right? To do in a big inflatable inverted commas, but without overly focusing or whatever on something, versus like having goals, you know, in like business or as a coach or like with my podcast, or relationship goals, life goals, fitness goals, like trying to like see the balance in the two. Because on one hand it's like, oh, you don't need to worry about the goals, but then on the other hand it's like, yeah, but I quite want the goals, you know. And it's like I started to see that and I call it creating from the future. It's like the future doesn't exist, right? It doesn't exist because we only have this moment now. So if for example I say to myself, oh, I want to become I'm going to think of something random, a jiu-jitsu master, which I don't want to do that. This is just a random example. If I wanted to become a jiu-jitsu master in 10 years time, how do I get there? It's not just going to happen, right? It'd be great if it did, but there's certain things I would still need to embody, shall we say. And I'd look at that and I'd go, okay, so if I wanted that to happen, what would someone who's a jiu-jitsu master be doing now? That means they would get to that point. And then it's like, okay, now I'd probably have to sign up for a jiu-jitsu class for a start. And then from there, you can just let the rest of it unfold. And you can like almost keep referring to that point in the future as a reference point. It's not like, oh, if I don't get there, I'm going to be very disappointed and unhappy. And if I get there, I'll be happier. It's like just, that's the direction I'm looking in. It's like having a GPS, you know, it's like you put the destination in and you can get there however you want. Once you know where the destination is, you can take whichever route you want, as long as you're looking in the right direction. Because if you're looking in the wrong direction, you're going to have to turn around, which still isn't a bad thing, because you still know eventually where you know what I mean? So it's like, I always had that struggle of like, where's the balance between the two? But I've really found that this living into the possibility right now is like something really exciting. So, and I'll give you an example, a real life example, not a made up one. I was talking to my coach about this yesterday, and I've got this idea of wanting to write a child-friendly novel / comic book. I'm not sure exactly what it will be yet, and have a story that I can share this kind of teaching and understanding and my learnings into the story. But I need to know that's something that I want to create in order to start creating it. If I don't have the goal, in inverted commas, as like the final, you know, piece, the comic book or the novel, whatever it will be, then I'm not going to start creating it from now. Whereas now that I have that as something I know that I would very much be interested in doing, I can start. I wrote the opening chapter yesterday straight off the bat, and I've had some more ideas today, and I'll probably write some more down today, and it will get created just almost by itself, but not quite, you know. It's like that. There's that like middle point, you know. I've put off so much stuff in my life because of the lack of motivation, but when I see that, you know, when I think about it from my own perspective, I don't want to speak for anyone else, so I'll speak from my own perspective. When I think about, okay, I'm not motivated right now, therefore it means that I can't do the thing. And I look at it from the point of, well, if it's just a feeling that I'm having, if I'm waiting for a feeling to arrive so that I can then feel motivated to do something, I'm playing the wrong game. Because the feeling, it comes from me. It's not like something outside of me is going to change and then I have this new feeling and now I'm going to act. The feeling comes from me. So if that's true, which is kind of the direction we look in with the work we do, then it means that I can act independently of the feeling that I currently have. There has to be a focus point, destination point, shall we keep calling it, right? To work towards. But there's things that you kind of almost have to do regardless of how you feel to make sure that those things are happening. You know, it's like, you know, you don't need to be motivated to be a mum, right? I'm not a parent, so I don't know. I'm assuming, right? But you don't wake up and feel like, oh, I'm not motivated to be a mum today, so I'm not going to be a mum. You're just being a mum, you know? The same way I already know before I go to bed tonight, I'm going to brush my teeth. I don't need to feel motivated to do it. So it shows me I can act independently of my feelings. And that's been so powerful for me, because if I don't feel motivated, I can still get stuff done, you know? It doesn't mean because I don't have the motivation, I can't do it. It's like me saying, I can't go to the gym today because I don't have any peanut butter in the fridge. The two don't, it's not like they're not, you know, they don't work in tandem like that. But if I believe that and I open the fridge and there's no peanut butter, I can't go to the gym. Can't do it. Can't go today. But if I see that I don't need peanut butter in the fridge in order to go to the gym, I can act independently of that. And I feel like that's the game we play with motivation, is like the motivation is the peanut butter in the fridge. But actually, we don't need to wait for the peanut butter in the fridge to be there to do the thing, because we can do it anyway. I've always really stuck to this saying, like, be where you are. And if you want to go one step further than that, be grateful or be happy with where you are. And once you're happy with where you are, you don't need anything more than where you are, what you're doing, what you're experiencing now. So therefore, the stuff that you want to do is just an additional thing. It's something you can do if you want. If you've got a preference for it, do it. If you don't. And that's how I got to doing a lot of the stuff that I do, is like, it's out of preference. You know, I don't think that by writing a, comic book or novel, whatever it will turn out to be, is going to make me any better than who or what I am now, because it can't. But I can choose to do it out of preference. And that's been a real game changer for me, because it's like, I'm starting to see that I'm not a slave. I'm not in a prison to these ideas of like, oh, I must do this, and it's like becomes this like angry, like frustrated approach to it, because it's like, oh, I have to get it done, because when I get there and I get to the top of the hill, I'm going to have an amazing view. But it's like, why can't you just enjoy being halfway up the hill and looking at the trees and the bushes and what's around you, and listening to the birds and seeing the squirrels and a few bugs and whatever, and chatting with your friends or whoever you're with, like, and then that means you'll be able to enjoy that top of the hill when you get there even more, and it's like, it's a real, we hear it all the time that the journey is the destination, and it's like, that's what I'm really starting to see, is like, if there isn't a destination for us to get to, because there isn't, what are we racing towards? Death? Really? If we're gonna be real, that's what we're all racing towards. So why don't we just enjoy the experience in between? We're all rushing towards something which we kind of don't even want to get to in the first place. And then we're kind of missing out on all of this amazing stuff in the middle. And it's like, why? Like, to me, it's made a lot more sense to enjoy every step of the way, enjoy the journey, enjoy the path. There's no point me trying to plan 100 steps ahead of where I'm at if all I've got to do is focus on the actual next step that I have to take, and take that step, and then take the next one, and then take the next step, and take the next one. And it's like, I was in France recently, and this is quite a funny teaching that I was hosting a retreat, and the crew that I was with, there was like 4 of us. And there was this really steep hill, so a set of really steep steps, and then a really steep hill to get up to the place where we were staying. So every day when we'd walk down to like the beach or like the town, we'd have to come back via this really steep hill. And it's pretty gruesome. I'm not gonna lie, it's like 15-20 minutes straight uphill in like the 30-degree sun, and it's pretty gruesome. And I would say to everyone, like, right, when you're doing this, like, don't worry about getting to the top of the hill. Just take the step that's in front of you. Take that step. Can you take it? Yes. Okay. Can you take the next one? Yes. Okay. Can we take the next one? Yes. Okay. And then sooner or later you're at the top, and yeah, you've sweated a little bit and you're a bit out of breath and whatever, but it's not such a hard slog, because you're not like, oh my God, I've still got 3/4 of the way to go. I don't know if I'm going to make this. I need water. I need to rest. You're just like, okay, am I going to be okay taking the next step? Yes. Okay. And then let's take the next one, and let's take the next one, and then let's take the next one. And it's like, it's a really interesting approach to life in general. It's just like, what's the next step? Take it. And then worry about the one after that, and then the one after that, and then the one after that. Don't try and think like, I need to know what step 100 is going to look like, because you don't know, and you never will until you're there. So it's called The Dash by Linda Ellis. And it goes, I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on the tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that the first came the date of birth, and spoke the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all the time they spent alive on earth. And now only those who love them know what little that line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. All that matters is how we spend our life and love, and how we spend our dash. So think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left that can still be rearranged. If we could just slow down enough to consider what's true and real, and always try to understand the way other people feel, and be less quick to anger and show appreciation more, and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering this special little dash might only last a while. So when your eulogy is being read, with your life's actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? If we look at nature as a whole, right? We take nature as a whole. Nature doesn't mind, and it doesn't matter to nature whether the lion catches the gazelle on the savannah or whether the gazelle runs away from the lion. Nature as a whole doesn't care. It's not that it doesn't care, it just doesn't matter on the grand scheme of things. It only matters to the lion and the gazelle because it's their version of what's happening in that moment in time in inverted commas. So it matters to them what the outcome is. But on the whole, to nature, it doesn't. Now, if we can recognize that there's a part of us that is that nature, that is the whole, that is a part of it, we can start to see that whether we do certain things or don't do certain things, or have certain things or don't have certain things, or create certain life or don't create a certain life, it doesn't really matter. It only matters to us because we've got this mind and thought created story about what it would mean to this self, in inverted commas, that we've created via thought. Now, nature as a whole doesn't have that mind created idea or concept of a self. It just is. Now, it's not to say we need to live our life in that way, because I don't think we ever will. As human beings, I don't think we ever will, because we're always going to have a point of I or self as a reference point for our lives individually. So the things that we experience are going to be experienced based on what our reference point of self is. Now, when we see that the self isn't something that we necessarily need to believe, we have chosen to in a way, whether it's unconscious or not, or subconscious or whatever, or conscious, we can see most of the decisions we make on a day-to-day basis really don't matter. It really doesn't matter what I have for lunch. It really doesn't matter whether I write this comic book or not. It really doesn't matter if we recorded this podcast or not. It really doesn't matter if I go to the gym tomorrow or not. It only matters to me if all of that stuff does or doesn't happen. But on the whole, it doesn't. And it's like leaning into a bit more of that and detaching my idea of self, again in inverted commas for those who are listening, which I guess is everyone. It doesn't matter as much. It still matters to me, but it doesn't matter as much. And that's freeing in itself. The concept that me and my friend came up with of 0 and plus. It's like 0 is the whole, is the what I was describing as nature, but the concept of 0 is formless. It's nothing. It's always there. It's ever present in us. It's immovable. It's eternal. It's divine. It's just there. 0 doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't care. It doesn't have a good or bad outcome. It doesn't have positive or negative. It doesn't have right or wrong. It just is. And everything outside of that is additional. It's optional. It's a plus. And the plus in this instant is the self that we've created is a plus. It's my plus. Me, Alex, who I refer to when I say Alex, the story that I'm referring to when I use that word and name, in inverted commas, Alex, is my plus. And I'm always going to experience life through that plus. But if I understand that there is also a part of me which is the 0, which is unmoved by whatever the story of the plus is in that moment, it all looks less convincing to be worried about, to be fearful about, to be anxious about, to be sad about, to be... Now, I like feeling all of those things because it's great. It's part of the human experience. We have these emotions to feel. Then none of them are good, none of them are bad. But if I start to give them the label or the experience of the point of self, of me, of Alex, of this feeling's bad or that feeling's good, and I'm just living in a land of conflict all the time because I feel something and I want to feel something else. I feel the thing that I want to feel, and then I'm scared I'm going to go back to the other feeling, so I want to try and hold on to it, and I'm not fully present, and it's this constant game of emotional cat and mouse. And it's a crazy way to live. I lived my life a long time like that, and I still do sometimes. I'm not saying I've figured it all out, because I definitely haven't, but it's like there's a beauty in the letting go of, it doesn't really matter. If I feel sad, it doesn't really matter. That's just feedback on what I'm feeling right now based on the thinking I'm having. Cool. It'll probably go eventually, and it will, because it does normally. There was a really big game-changing moment for me a couple years ago. I was watching a David Attenborough documentary on the BBC, and he was talking about sustainability and the state of the planet, and we're killing the environment and all that amazing stuff that he talks about, which we should be listening to, right? And right at the end of the episode of the series, sorry, maybe it was a one-off, I can't remember, but right at the end of it, he was like, if we continue down this path, the only part of the world that's going to suffer is the human race. He was like, we're the ones that are going to get wiped out. If there's toxic environment and we can't breathe, we'll get wiped out, because nature will continue. It will continue to evolve. And this was the bit that shook me, right? He went back to, Chernobyl, where there was the big radioactive explosion thing. Excuse me for the ignorance of how to describe it, but it's blanked my mind. But he went back, and he was like, these are all of the buildings that humans haven't been allowed to go to for years and years and years because of the level of radioactivity. And it was completely reclaimed by nature. There was ivy going up the buildings. There was birds flying around. There was all sorts. And nature was thriving in a place where humans couldn't. And that was the moment for me where I was like, oh, I get this a bit more now. Like, that's the part it's just always going to be there. It doesn't care. It doesn't care. Radioactive? What's that? Like, doesn't matter to me. Like, there's a way that nature's going to thrive. And that nature is the zero. It's the, you can call it the formless, the energy, spirit, God, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. We're talking about the same thing more often than not. It's always there, and it's always going to thrive. And that's also within us. So my work as a coach is really strongly grounded in this conversation that we've been having, helping people to look in this direction and see through a different lens than maybe the one that they've been looking through. I'm fortunate, I wear glasses, so I can use this as the example. It's like, take the glasses off and see life through a different, put a different lens on, or see a different perspective, right? And it's changing people's lives. Like, the people that I've worked with in the past 2 years, specifically when I've really got into more of this conversation, people are becoming free of their anxiety, free of their worries. They're living more fulfilled, happy lives. And it's like, yeah, you could look at it on the surface and say, well, it doesn't look like their life has changed much, but their experience of it is what has changed. And then when the experience of life changes internally, then the external, generally speaking, changes with it. One of my clients, he's a coach. He's made more money this year than he's made in the last 3 years as a whole. And we haven't really spoken about business. We did initially, but we've mainly been talking about this stuff. And it's freeing the space in his mind, and it's dropping the stories and the limitations that his mind has created, so that he can create more freely within himself. And the external tends to follow. And it's an amazing thing. And it's, there's many ways that I work with people, like one-to-one, groups, retreats, as I mentioned earlier. And it's a kind of, choose the level of engagement that you want to have more of these conversations. Or if not, go and listen to my podcast, read my comic when it comes out. I'm going to throw that one in there to make sure it happens. I'm just about to start this business accelerator, which is 3 months. And there's an online course, which is the prep work, which is just the theory. This is the things you do to grow your business. And then the actual group work and the time we spend together is purely going to be looking in this direction. Let's look at the thinking. Let's look at the thoughts. Let's look at the limitations. Tell me about your relationship with your partner, because I'm sure there's something in that that's probably getting in the way of you having a more successful business, because it all ties together. And it's the more we go into the mental loft and we clear out some of the junk that's in the boxes, we create space for something new to come through us, some new thoughts, some new insights, some new wisdom. And then that is a place that we can then create from. And yeah, I love it every day. Like, it's every day I wake up and I'm just excited. I've actually been quite tame on this recording. I'm generally quite excited a lot of the time because I'm just having these amazing conversations with people. So it's good fun. So there we have it. Thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. And I'd love to know what you got from this episode. I'd love to know what's the one thing that really stood out for you, that you learned and that you would like to take forward into your life and implement into your life. I started this podcast because I wanted to open conversation with people. So please DM me. Let me know what's the one learning you're taking from this episode. You can hit me up on Instagram at I am Alex Manzi. And if you think that there's someone you know who would benefit from hearing this episode, be sure to share it with them. Send them the link, a screenshot. Because it's so important that we start to spread the positive vibes and messages of episodes like this. I started this podcast because I wanted to make a positive change, and you can be a part of that by sharing this episode with someone you know today. So I want to thank Michaela Atsu for producing and editing this episode, and I want to thank Hobgoblin for providing the sick music that you hear. And as always, I want to thank you for spending time with me today, and I'll see you for the next episode.